It is now my singular honor and privilege to invite President Higgins to address the audience. Thank you so much for your attention.
Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Dr. George Chaponda, Deputy Minister for Education, Science and Technology, Chairperson of the University Council, Professor Zakaria Kasamakera, Vice-Chancellor, Professor George Kenyama-Firi, Honourable Ministers, members of the diplomatic community, representatives from partner organisations, scholars, above all else, students, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me particular pleasure to join you here at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And may I thank Vice-Chancellor Professor George Kenyama-Firi and the entire academic community for the invitation to give this address. At the outset, allow me also to offer my congratulations to the University and the people of Malawi on your first 50 years as an independent country. On 20 years of multi-party democracy, and on the occasion of your first tripartite elections in May of this year, I offer my congratulations to you on behalf of the Irish people, as firm friends and partners in meeting the great challenges that are before us. Tá áthas fé liv, is tres liam liv, as an metata buinchamakaki, har liakead. Malawi is a vital partner for Ireland in our development cooperation programme. We are determined to maintain that partnership in the years ahead. As we work towards developing agriculture and natural resource systems to provide the food, nutrition, and energy requirements for our present, but equally, maybe even more important, future generations. And as we approach the 2015 deadline for the implementation of the Millennium Development Goals, there is, of course, some positive news, and there are reasons to be optimistic as we examine the substantial progress that has been made at a global level on many of the targets. The number of people living in extreme poverty in the world has been halved, while the target of also having the number of global citizens suffering from hunger now appears to be within reach. Access to education has improved dramatically, and major progress is being made in the fight against tuberculosis and malaria. But progress has been uneven, revealing stark inequalities between and within countries, and it continues to be undermined, this progress, this partial progress, by conflicts that are emerging across the globe. Meanwhile, the disastrous and distressing Ebola outbreak in West Africa threatens to reverse many of the hard-earned gains that have been made in recent times. So as the deadline for reaching the Millennium Development Goals approaches, this 25 years that was begun in 1990, we enter a crucial period in which we have the opportunity to learn from what has been achieved, but also from the obstacles to an authentic development that might fulfill the basic needs of people, that would have such fulfillment as its major aim. Ireland has, of course, in the review that is now underway, has the great honour of our permanent representative to the United Nations to have been asked to co-facilitate, along with Kenya, the negotiations which will lead to the agreement of new succeeding global goals in September 2015. In accepting this great honour, let me assure you that Ireland will work to ensure that Africa and those African states facing the greatest development challenges will have a central role in the process. We are committed to the building of a credible framework which can, we hope, end extreme poverty and hunger, in a generation by focusing on those facing the greatest development needs. And let me say, it is my conviction that we can end poverty and reduce inequality, not just extreme poverty. Mahatma Gandhi once observed that the earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. And those words still resound with great veracity in today's world, where more than 1 billion people remain undernourished, over 2 billion suffer from nutritional deficiencies, and almost 6 million children die every day from malnutrition or related diseases. Globally, 1 person in 8 suffers from chronic hunger, despite the fact that there is more than enough food produced to feed the world's population. That the source of this hunger is not a lack of food, indeed, as you have heard about the Irish experience in the 19th century, but it is the result of an endemic poverty created by injustice and inequality, and thus it remains one of the greatest global challenges we face in the 21st century. And may I say, because I'm in an academic community, it represents one of the greatest ethical failures of the current systems of global governance. It is an indictment of current structures. These figures challenge us to give real meaning to words like interdependence. It suggests that we have arrived at a globalization that serves international corporations, perhaps, but not necessarily the vulnerable people of this planet. So I wish to focus today on this central question of food security and the associated issues of land, poverty, and gender, in addressing how, working together, we may have reason to be hopeful that we will resolve the issues of hunger and food security in the coming years. Before I address the substantive issues which we face in meeting the challenge of food security, however, I feel it is important to suggest why this issue, as you have heard, is so important to the Irish people. The terrible vulnerability of hunger is something that reaches deep into the Irish psyche as our national history remains shadowed by that dark chapter that was the Irish famine, Ungorta Mór, or the Great Hunger in our native language, sometimes referred to as the years of the potato failure. We have found difficulty in even giving a title to what we experienced in those 3 years. During a few short years in the 1840s, 1 million people died from starvation and disease, and 1 million more were forced to leave our shores forever in search of a better home. Yes, it was a famine originating from crop failure, and sustained, of course, by a great failure of governance and humanity, a failure driven by a doctrinaire adherence to a flawed ideology which placed the assumed efficiency of the market and economic gain ahead of solidarity, compassion, or any empathy. Famine was ascribed by some authorities, indeed, perhaps to be part of some divine plan to control Ireland's growing population. Much needed food continued to be exported while Irish people starved, and the removal of millions of tenant families led to the freeing up of estates for an investment in more profitable crops. Issues of hunger, then, land ownership, relationship to the land, have had a deep resonance for the Irish people ever since. It's in our history, in our literature, and it's in our policies. And this experience has echoed through the generations and has shaped the values and principles of the Irish people, motivating Ireland's programme of overseas aid, Irish Aid. It is motivated to focus on the poorest and the most vulnerable, and this experience explains why hunger and nutrition are at the core of Ireland's overseas aid programme today. We do this not simply because we remember parts of our history, but because it would be evasive and wrong to ever forget. Turning then to the challenge before us today. I believe that the challenge of food security is the greatest challenge facing humanity at the start of the 21st century. But I also believe that for the first time we have reason to be hopeful that solutions can be found, are available for implementation. The progress which Malawi has made in prioritizing nutrition has been recognized internationally. In 2013, at the Nutrition for Growth Summit in London, hosted by the United Kingdom and Brazilian governments, a number of important financial and policy commitments were made towards improved nutrition. One of these commitments was that a global nutrition report would be compiled, and the government of Malawi and the United Kingdom are leading the stakeholder group compiling this important report, which will be launched at the International Conference on Nutrition in Rome later on this month. I also congratulate the government of Malawi on its performance in the annual Hunger and Nutrition Commitment Index. Run by the Institute of Development Studies and supported by Irish Aid, this index ranks 45 governments on their political commitment to reduce hunger and undernutrition. Malawi lies third. It's third on the index, with only Guatemala and Peru ahead in terms of their political commitment to address hunger issues. I believe that such level of commitment, with the right policy choices and support, can translate into equally impressive progress in reducing malnutrition in the coming years. And I wish to share with you today Ireland's perspective on some of these issues. The 2008 report of the Irish Hunger Task Force has shaped Irish foreign and development cooperation policy in recent years. That report produced three major recommendations. Firstly, that smallholder African agriculture should receive more support and resources, and special recognition be given to the role of women, who are mainly the smallholder farmers. Secondly, that much greater emphasis and support should be given to nutrition, particularly early childhood nutrition. Thirdly, that Ireland should seek to play a leadership role at international level on the issue of hunger and upgrading, improving nutrition. The report and its recommendations, especially those first two recommendations, were addressed to the broad international community, and I'm glad to be able to report that they struck a chord and they were influential in changing policy. The third recommendation, about Ireland becoming a leading voice in the fight against hunger, was obviously addressed to the Irish government. The then government accepted the report in its entirety, and its successor, the current government, has continued this policy. So I am glad to be able to tell you that Malawi played a part in helping shape the conclusions of this influential Hunger Task Force report. The Hunger Task Force came to Malawi in February of 2008. It visited the countryside, discussed with government officials, civil society, and most important of all, farmers. And it drew conclusions which were reflected in the final report. So my country's political leaders and policymakers are in your debt for that consultation as we prepare the report. Our understanding of the issue of hunger is directly influenced by your experience in Malawi. And I believe that this approach, focusing on vulnerable smallholder farmers in the first instance, centering national policies on nutrition, and combining with action at the international level, can provide the basis for a very successful strategy. Yesterday, I had the privilege of visiting the wonderful community of Sao Pampeni in Salima district. It is one of 1,000 communities in the 11 most vulnerable districts which benefit from the partnership between Malawi, Norway, the United Kingdom and Ireland in rolling out what is called the Enhancing Community Resilience Programme. Working with non-governmental organisations, the communities identified their critical vulnerabilities and designed interventions to address them. Interventions that included crop diversification, village savings and loan clubs, community seed banks, livestock pass-on schemes, energy-efficient stoves, and micro-irrigation schemes, amongst others. I was very impressed by the community's sense of being in charge of these initiatives, of ownership, of how they use the limited resources available, and of how they combined it with their own local knowledge, their rich indigenous knowledge, to achieve such a change in their daily livelihoods. I understand that much of this knowledge and skills has originated from the university here, and I commend LUANAR for its vision and support that makes such advances possible. And I also wish to commend the Malawian government's efforts to provide a social safety net for the poorest households in the country through the Malawi National Social Cash Transfer Program. And this reminded me, as I heard of it, of how we, intellectuals who are working and others, must never forget the role of the state and the importance of debating the role of the state. For there is a role of the state in providing such a social safety net. And I wouldn't be honest as an academic if I didn't say, when I began as a very young university teacher, issues of Keynesianism were still acceptable in economics. But as I finished my role as a university teacher, we had entered decades that were hostile to the role of the state, and we have paid an appalling price for such, because the state working with the voluntary sector and the civil society is how the transition to meet these goals I've described can best be met. Hopefully we are now, in the next 25 years, after the Millennium Development Goals, in a new period in which we will be open to the pluralist scholarship that will offer us new options and new policies. Providing in that scheme, providing social cash transfers to the most vulnerable people in society is one of the most effective ways of tackling long-term hunger and empowering communities, giving them assistance with the resilience necessary to withstand external shocks, including natural disasters. And when we have made our communities, in whatever countries we live in, safe by having good policies, we must also begin now globally to address how we can become immune from those external shocks that are created by global fast money and the speculative system that is capable of dislodging good economic planning in any part of our planet. The Irish government is happy to partner with Malawi in supporting this work, and we're particularly pleased to learn that last month alone, for the first time, some 8,500 of the poorest households in Balaka district received their cash transfers. In particular, this linking of humanitarian action, such as social cash transfer programs, with longer-term development programs, such as essential infrastructure, public works, village savings and loans, and other resilience-building programs, real progress can be made in freeing the poorest people out of the poverty cycle. If we are to prevent the tragedies of the past, then measures such as these, which focus on the resilience of the most vulnerable, are key. And I believe we have reason to be confident that we are making progress. Some years earlier, Malawi made another important contribution in shaping policy on nutrition. It was an advance that went beyond the borders of Malawi. From 2002 onwards, Concern Worldwide, one of Ireland's leading NGOs, in partnership with Valid International and supported by Irish Aid, conducted field tests in Malawi on a new approach to dealing with acute malnutrition. This new approach meant tackling the problem of acute malnutrition using community resources rather than the more established therapeutic health centre approach, which involved the malnourished child staying in the centre along with his mother. Significantly, an anthropological study conducted by the University of Malawi on the cultural and social factors affecting malnutrition influenced the design of the research and the final recommendations. And over a 3-year period, and drawing on the evidence from field trials in Ethiopia and South Sudan, This community-based approach was shown to give much better results in terms of reducing mortality and greater coverage of the affected population. In 2007, the United Nations formally adopted this approach, named Community Management of Acute Malnutrition, as the standard recommended practice for dealing with acute malnutrition, and it is now applied in over 70 countries. So once again, Malawi was leading the world in developing culturally sensitive and effective nutrition strategies. Ireland is also working to build the necessary capacity in your Department of Nutrition and HIV and AIDS to roll out the nutrition education and communication strategy. And I'm delighted to see that through these efforts, LUANAR has worked with communities in designing materials and programs that will assist in educating mother and child care groups in the poorest communities in this country. LUANAR, using traditional foods, as I saw in the exhibition on my way in, has devised recipes for nutritious diets, and the program is making an important contribution to helping mothers at community level, to help and support younger, less experienced and more vulnerable mothers. So research and practice initiated in Malawi is now being adopted across the world. Another important dimension to understanding the social and cultural context of policy application is, of course, and I must deal with it now, is that of gender. I was privileged yesterday to meet with 4 Irish non-governmental organisations and a number of inspirational Malawian women with whom they work, as they prepare for what they call 16 days of activism against gender violence campaign. 16 days of activism against gender violence campaign. How important that is. And it is part of a wider global campaign. And I was inspired to hear of these women's experience in overcoming the myriad challenges in their daily lives, dealing with HIV/AIDS, gender-based violence, climate change, the day-to-day challenge of finding the food, water, and energy needs of their families. Last year, a group of those impressive women farmers visited Ireland for our international conference on hunger, nutrition, and climate justice. I met some of those who had travelled yesterday again. And a critical lesson from those women was that we must ensure that the voices and experiences of local communities are heard at the highest level internationally. All of these different groups of women once again underline the centrality of women's role in national development and the great truth spoken by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Olivier de Schutter, when he states, food security strategies should be judged on their ability to challenge gender roles and to truly empower women. Gender sensitivity is important, but it is not a substitute for empowerment. And I agree. Equal access to services and productive resources must be guaranteed for women who, after all, comprise the majority of smallholder farmers in Malawi. And we must ensure that policies and programs are responsive to the realities faced by women and to their needs as carers and breadwinners. And in that regard, let me also congratulate LUANAR on your contribution to equality through the recent launch of your diploma, degree and master's level courses on gender and development. Your partnership with the Ministry of Gender, Children's Disability and Social Welfare will help provide the country with the necessary leaders to advance gender issues over the coming decades. Looking to the future, Ireland is convinced, as I know is Malawi, that research and innovation hold the key to tackling hunger and climate issues. Ireland is proud to have worked closely with the member organisations of the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, both here in Malawi and at the global level. With the Potato Research Centre, to which you have made reference already, we have developed and introduced new and improved varieties of both the Irish potato and the orange-fleshed sweet potato. We have supported the International Crops Research Institute for the semi-arid tropics and the Malawi Seed Industry Development Programme, which over the last 5 years have made significant strides in addressing the need for good quality and a sufficient quantity of seeds, particularly groundnuts. Working with the World Agroforestry Centre, we also have implemented a food security through agroforestry programme that will promote awareness of the food, fuel, fibre and fertiliser benefits of trees. I commend the Malawian government in prioritising the agricultural sector in its budgeting process. And I do so in conscious knowledge that there were periods in the 1980s when the multilateral advice, which did not take into account the actual needs of people on the ground, was quite hostile to its state interventions, which were essential and necessary. Through the agricultural sector, and now the World Bank-led multi-donor trust fund, 6 donors have brought together much of their support to the agriculture sector. The Irish government is committed to providing very significant assistance annually for 4 years through this multi-donor trust fund. We know that in addressing malnutrition, it is important to not only increase food production, but to also pay serious attention to what food is being produced. Malawi's significant and commendable progress in increasing maize production, not least through the successful fertiliser subsidy programme, will not by itself address its hunger challenge. I would hope that the multi-donor fund will provide the necessary resources to address the maize focus of the previous decades and will devise a more balanced sector approach that restores Malawi's former significant diversity of food production. Investing in the infrastructure resources and services that might enable small farmers to access local markets and distribution channels is, of course, also important. But it is even more important that affected populations can contribute to the deliberations and the decision-making processes in the journey from one model of economy, society, and culture to another. And this is all the more important when globally, regionally, and at continental level, great changes are underway, which will require new paradigms of intellectual work, new strategies, new policies, and above all, pluralist scholarship. And of course, the efforts being made here in Malawi and in other countries, facing the challenge of food security, must be seen in the context of this global challenge, this challenge of climate change and the associated issues of population and land. Climate change has triggered a move towards growing fuel rather than food crops. And this provides a new and profound challenge in the battle against famine and poverty. It requires active, as I've said, pluralist, responsive policies that ensure that climate-related decisions prioritize the needs of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable. Like all visitors to Malawi, I've been hugely impressed by the beauty of your country, your plants, trees and shrubs that are very much part of this natural beauty. The beautiful purple jacaranda trees, your majestic baobab trees, your fragrant frangipani trees, your bountiful papaya and mango trees, these are all such an essential element of your amazing environment and central to the global perception of Malawi as the beautiful warm heart of Africa. Reducing and reversing the loss of this natural environment must be a high priority. And I am aware that the government of Malawi is setting a target to roll out 2 million fuel-efficient stoves by 2020. Ireland is proud and will be proud to continue to work with the Ministry for Energy to support the work of the National Cookstove Task Force in meeting that target. By harnessing simple, appropriate and affordable technologies such as energy-efficient stoves and solar lighting, by planning for the delivery of millions of tons of biomass through sustainable tree and forestry management, and by harnessing carbon finance for poor communities, real energy solutions can be provided for the 80% of the population who are unlikely to be able to immediately access the national electricity grid. In Ireland, we recognise that all nations have a role and responsibility in both adapting to and mitigating against future climate change. As a member of the European Union, we are firmly committed to significantly reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions and to supporting countries such as Malawi, who are on the front line, paying the price in adapting to the growing impacts of climate change. For our own part, Ireland is striving to become a world leader in carbon-efficient agriculture and food production. Our agriculture policy has a strong focus on ensuring that the agriculture model we promote and support addresses the key environmental and climate challenges we face globally together, and that it meets the strictest safety and quality criteria. We've carried out over 57,000 carbon footprint assessments on our farms and food industries, striving to ensure that the policies adopted and the investments made will ensure sustainable increased production. By the end of 2016, all of our food and drink producers will have joined the Origin Green movement. We also carry this commitment to our engagement at the multilateral level, and at the recent United Nations General Assembly, Ireland expressed its intention to join the new Global Alliance for Climate-Smart Agriculture. This alliance brings together governments, farmers, scientists, businesses and civil society, as well as regional unions and international organisations. The alliance aims to improve agriculture, forestry and fisheries practices, food systems and social policies so that they can better take into account climate change and the efficient use of natural resources. Linked to the issue of climate change and the pressure that this can place on land use, we must also consider the most appropriate ways to maximise land production while respecting and arranging for the involvement of the position of small landholders. If one is to develop a commercial sector that is sustainable, that moves from sufficiency and is responsive to cultural and intuitive wisdom, then more is needed in addition, or more accurately as alternatives, to the expansion of large plantations. In many parts of Africa, unequal distribution and access to land remains a structural form of inequality. In other areas, the phenomenon of land grabbing, whereby large swathes of the countryside that are considered idle are being sold or transferred through long-term leases to usually foreign investors, is a major source of concern. According to Professor Ruth Hall from the University of Cape Town, some 56 to 227 million hectares have changed hands globally over the last 5 to 10 years, with African land making up 60 to 70% of those large land deals. So there is no question that the demographic challenge, in particular the need to provide for growing demand in the continent's mushrooming cities, calls for proactive policy responses. But it can also be asserted that with some substance that the industrial or commercial model of agriculture may in some areas offer some productivity gains. But however one might rightfully interrogate the rationale underpinning these massive transfers of land, organised in the name of the so-called modernisation of African agriculture and the need to achieve more efficient food production, we might well ask, are these objectives to be pursued at the expense of the food security of the local farming population, and particularly demanding a price particularly for smallholder women farmers? LUANAR, I think, before concluding today, I want again to pay tribute to the academic staff and the students of LUANAR, with which Ireland has been fortunate to enjoy a growing and very beneficial relationship, and one we look forward to deepening. LUANAR, with your agricultural, natural resources and nutrition focus, you are uniquely positioned to input and inform a prosperous and sustainable Malawi. The students who are here today are amongst the brightest and best in Malawi, and I know that you and your families have made great sacrifices to enable you to study here in LUANAR. And you can and you must build the vital link between research and the experiences of your people. It's a very long time since I started out as a young university teacher, But you know, those of us who are in universities have a responsibility not just to describe the world or to seek to analyze it, but also to make our contribution in our own time to change the world and to offer future generations a better planet than that which we inherited, and to be open to all the suggestions of intellect and of our moral direction, to be open to want to see a version of the world that is yet to be born. I think I will encourage you then to emphasize the importance of intellectual curiosity and intellectual courage to challenge perceived wisdom and orthodoxies, false inevitabilities. As Raymond Williams once put it, when you have taken the first step towards questioning inevitabilities, you have taken the first step in a journey of hope. It is like that, and it's a great privilege to be in a university as a student or a teacher. And I would go further and say that it is essential that you, the leaders of tomorrow, identify, recognize, and be able to intellectually dispose of failed models as much as you discover new ones and imagine new and exciting possibilities for your future. When I was a young student, I read people like Senghor and others, and they had a vision, like so many great leaders in Africa had a vision, that moved out of any accepted orthodoxy and that offered something that would be wonderful, inclusive, and ennobling in the future. And as we look back on the history of the relationship between Ireland and Malawi over the last century, and as we consider our present partnerships, I very much look forward to renewed Irish, European, and international partnership with Malawi, one that by 2030, at the end of these coming decades, will eliminate extreme poverty. Eliminate poverty because that is possible, and also address the issue of inequality, that leave a cleaner and greener planet for posterity, and spare no effort in placing human rights, those human rights for which we should not offer culture or tradition as a shield when they are essential, integral rights of the human person. And all of this will be at the center of our collective efforts in promoting peace and security everywhere and for everyone. Mar focal scir con clicacar le as I say in my own language. May I finally extend my very sincerest thanks to Professor George Kanyama Firi, Vice-Chancellor, his team of staff, and all of you students for hosting me here at LUANAR. And I thank you all most sincerely for your warm welcome and attention. And I look forward to our discussions. And I wish you every success for the future. Thank you.